and was so polyrhythmic that you couldn't really chart what was being played. And you could create a chart and you could write the notes down, but it wouldn't actually capture the cadence or the feeling of what was being played. It was impossible because there were things going on in between the notes that you just can't write down. It had to be felt or heard, but more so felt. So what occurred during the I would say even the disco era of the 70s and all the way up until the late 90s, early 2000s, is that there started to become an infusion of really simplistic drum and bass rhythms. And eventually in the 80s leading itself to synthesized music in a drum machine, where everything is now quantized by a grid. So whereas before you would go into the studio and you would play by ear, by feeling, or maybe even with a metronome. Now you have a machine telling you what the timing or the BPM, which stands for beats per minute, should be. Now everything has to be around 90 to 95 BPMs because that's the rhythm that sells. That's the speed, the tempo that sells right now. So at 90 to 95 beats per minute, you have a metronome inside of a computer going off, and you can basically just move around sounds, almost like a puzzle, and make the song that way. You don't actually have to have an ear. You don't actually even have to be listening while you're making it. You just have to be able to use a computer and move things around. So now what occurred with this is that it allowed the wrong type of people to get into the music industry. So let's say, for instance, if I were one who had some influence and power in the world, but I was unable to replicate genius that I saw in other parts of the world, and I knew that I was one who was going to have offspring, how would I establish a paradigm where my offspring could now benefit and profit from the genius that is being made in the world, even though they can never be the originators of that genius? So what I could do now is convince those who are of that genius strain to dumb down and simplify what they do in order for me to have a place in it. So when music became really simplified, towards the late 90s, in terms of its syncopation, hip hop no longer had the bounce that it once had. Human concerns. So that may mean that eventually you may not be as concerned about the presidential debate. You may not be so concerned about oil spilling in the waters. You may not be so concerned about the jobless rate. You may not even be so concerned about the condition, welfare of those who are very close to you. But this is a part of your process. It's not necessarily where you are meant to stay forever. But eventually, as you go through this, you'll start to understand that these human concerns are temporary. And they really are just part of the illusion that is put here to convince you that this is the real world. This is the real life. So it's just like the recipe that you receive. You have been trained and indoctrinated with thinking that those particular herbs and those formulas and combinations of those dry herbs will be the panacea to whatever your issue is. They will be the cure-all. This is incorrect. It is the essence and the ability, the spiritual ability that resides within certain herbs and potions and liquids and oils. It is the essence that resides in them that has the potential to stimulate your soul and steer it into a certain pattern that gives them the power that they have. For you, possibly frankincense does nothing for you. It may not stimulate anything in you. Maybe burning a $1 stick of incense out of a gas station may do more for you than burning a $10 bag of frankincense. So you hold the result higher than the recipe. that's more important. This even comes down to when you're dealing with various spiritual systems. The system itself is not important. What's important is your approach and your ideology while within the system. What is the mindset that you are taking on? Are you taking on the mindset of self-possession, or are you looking for that system to rule over you and possess you? And I will give you this hint. Until you can possess yourself, you can't possess anything in life. So as you're doing these rituals in order to receive certain things, you're going to find that the ritual may work temporarily and things may come into your life, but you'll never be able to hold on to them because you have no ability of self-possession. Self-possession implies itself to also self-direction, self-restraint, self-control, self-definition, kuichakalia. Self-possession is all important. You have to possess your way. You have to possess your culture. Mystically on your shoulder. To possess your own. This is about you becoming a giant within your own reality. You become a giant within your own reality by absorbing these energies. A good movie that you should look at is The Highlander. And it used to be a series that came on, but it started out with the movie with Sean Connery. And it was about basically these immortal beings. And there was various immortal beings that lived on the planet. And what they would do is they would kind of hunt each other down. And they had to use swords and they would chop each other's heads off. Now, what would happen is that when one would kill another immortal, and of course they lived forever unless they could only kill each other. When one killed another immortal, they would absorb the power of that immortal, so they would become stronger. So some would search and hunt the earth for other immortals in order to become more and more powerful. Well, this is actually what you do when you invoke and study these Orisha or these other entities that I've given you information about. You are absorbing their wisdom. You are absorbing their ashe and their potential of power in order for you to become a giant in your reality. It's all about you taking them in, almost becoming like a feminine energy, like a womb, and absorbing what's taken into you, transforming it into something for your own purposes and for your own good through the power of your will, and then outputting something even greater than what came in. This is why you study these entities, and this is what destroys the spiritual hypocrisy that really only speaks to dead intelligence and a false sense of knowing, or a false sense of achievement and accomplishment. So what we need to really start focusing on is now, how do we move from thought to action? Number one. And number two, what is the action that we are here to take? Your end all and be all is not spiritual enlightenment, because spiritual enlightenment is occurring right now as you're listening. And for those of you who are put off or offended, spiritual transformation is occurring. So there's always some form of that push and pull that is occurring. So that's not the end all be all. In truth, when you come to a place where you finally discovered your path, or you've discovered a knowing of spiritual enlightenment and transformation, that's actually when everything ends and begins. That is the Odu Ofun Meji, where we're dealing with the symbol of the egg. Ofun Meji speaks to, it's the last.